Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. An unlikely and unexpected meeting with my cousin, Mick Brennan, led us to recording this podcast at the beginning of the year. Mike is a psychotherapist and counsellor, among many other interests that he has. On the podcast, we figured out the meaning of life, and he also chatted to me about the importance of building a solid foundation for your mental health and general well-being by looking after a few basic things every day. While we chatted about well-being, we also spoke about the importance of being resilient and being able to cope with the normal stresses that life can throw at all of us. A happy new year to all of my listeners, and now let's hear from Mick. Mick Brennan, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, Greg. Thank you for having me, and a happy new year to you and anyone who's listening.
And I know this is a bit weird for you because you were saying you're used to being the one who's asking the questions.
That's right. I dipped into podcasting for some time a few years ago, and I haven't done it now for a while. But I think I'm a better listener than I am talker, and so it is. I'm in the opposite side of the chair now. So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
I'm feeling very uncomfortable.
I am. I'm sitting bolt upright. I have a cushion resting on my lap just for comfort and to ease my touch of anxiety that I have, but I guess that's normal to feel a little bit anxious.
Yeah. So it's not the worst thing in the world, is it, to feel a bit uneasy and what's coming?
No, it's important to be able to feel unease and feel it and move through it, in my opinion, yeah. It's
kind of weird. This is the first podcast that I'm putting out in the year. You know, I'm really busy. I'm really busy with work and with all of my routines and everything. And part of my routine is the podcast. For the most part, I'm trying to punch out. It used to be one a week. Now it's probably one a fortnight. A lot of time and effort goes into it. And the fact that we're recording, for me, it's back into the start of the routine, you know, in another year. So, as usual, I'll take the recording, I'll go editing, which will be a few hours at the computer. And for the last couple of weeks, I've managed to park all of that and park all of my normal activity. And I'm very conscious of getting caught into that whole treadmill again in the new year. So we might talk about that because I think they're the natural conversations and thoughts that we're all having at this time of the year. The other thing I wanted to say to you was, we'll declare to the listeners that we're cousins.
That's right.
But probably typical cousins. We could easily go from one 5-year period to the next 5-year period without ever seeing each other, bumping into each other. We might meet each other at a wedding, more likely at a funeral, and we can talk about that as well. But I bumped into you because you were working in Skull.
That's right.
Helping a pal out in a fantastic restaurant, Nico's, if anyone hasn't been there. And wow, it was lovely. And you're there with your partner, Ellie, you know, helping out your buddy inside there. And of course we do the usual thing, which is, sure, we have to get together sometime and we're living down the road and stuff. And I'd say 99 times out of 100, that does not happen. But this time it actually did. And you instigated it. What's happening with us whereby we do have those conversations? Do we mean them at the time?
I think it's a very Irish thing to make very casual arrangements for the future and rarely follow through on them. And I'll absolutely speak for myself in saying 99 times out of 100, I don't. And it's funny because we are cousins, but you are a bit older than me. But my older siblings have always had a lot of time for you, and they've always spoken very highly of you, and for whatever memories they have of you as kids. And when I told them I met you in the restaurant, my older sister Deirdre said to me, "Oh, you should follow through on meeting Greg," because I'd said, you know, we did that thing of, oh, let's meet and let's make an arrangement and call down to the house. But Deirdre said to me, you know, Michael, if I know Greg as well as I think I do, and she said it like she doesn't know you that well, but she said if she knows you as well as she thinks she does, that you really genuinely meant that. Anyway, so months had passed and Christmas time was coming along, and I didn't realize you were living down here spending as much time down here as you are, yourself and Deirdre, your wife Deirdre. So I figured you'd be down at Christmas time. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to reach out, because I usually don't. And I did quite like the very brief engagements we had during the summer in the restaurant. So yeah, and here we are now. And you had us down to your wonderful home on New Year's Eve, and it was just so lovely. And I'm really glad that I reached out. Yes, and thank you for having me here on your podcast.
Something happens when you say yes, and something happens when you walk through those doors and you push them open and take those little opportunities. So already we've had you over to our place. We had a lovely afternoon chit-chatting, discovering loads of different things about each other that we had never known, in all honesty.
Yeah.
And already other doors are opening and other people. So it's a really good thing to open those doors and follow through with those invitations to meet people and to get to know them a little bit better. Because I think the world is it's a really interesting place with lots of different things going on, and it's the easiest thing in the world not to follow up, but it's even easier as well to follow through with those arrangements and meet people and enjoy new experiences. Has something happened to us generally in that we don't follow up anymore? Do you think that's changed?
In people?
Yeah.
I think it has. My very quick answer to that, like Joe, the first thing that comes to mind is the convenience we have of technology. It's so easy to connect via text, via Skype, via FaceTime with people from a distance, that maybe we've kind of forgotten how to connect in person. And I know for sure that I worry about meeting people in person before I meet them, just my own social anxieties, whatever they are. But then when I meet them, I'll come away with my partner Ellie and be like, wow, that was really nice. And it's always a reminder that I actually really enjoy meeting people, but I just feel a little bit anxious beforehand. But coming back to your original question about meeting people less and like letting connections lapse, I do think mobile phones and technology have become a barrier to that, and they're almost like inverted. Like social media has made us less sociable, because you see people's lives from a distance, and you feel like you're actually connecting with someone you don't even know through social media. And maybe that is fulfilling some need in the brain that makes us connect less than in person. But I actually feel to sit with someone in their presence and have an open conversation, I feel like on a heart level, I think we need that, or maybe more so on a soul level. But I think it's really important to connect in person.
And we're even dancing through the steps of connecting with someone. You know, is it okay if I get your number? That's a social thing you need to jump over, isn't it? Like, you know, that's taking that connection to a stage further. Is it okay if I ask you for your number? Oh, yeah, sure. And you do that, so that takes that arrangement. And then as a follow-up, do you text the person? Is it appropriate to text them? My God almighty, do you jump further and actually ring the person? Holy shit. I think there are things we would have done without batting an eyelid before. But now, even though we are socially connected so much easier through social media and everything, in a weird way, I think social media has kind of blocked us. Because instead of saying, you know, can I get your number? What we might say instead is, oh, are you on Instagram? I'll follow you. Which is a lot more passive, isn't it? It's kind of like, oh yeah, I'm going to follow you there. And maybe instead of sending you a text, I like some image that you put up there. So we're connecting in a very insubstantial way and not properly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I'm noticing now there's, what do you call it? A box or an accordion? Is it what do you call that?
An accordion.
Yeah. Do you play that? Do you?
I don't. That's Ellie's.
That's
It was
Ellie's.
actually a friend of Ellie's gave her a loan of it. couple of years ago. So Ellie used to play it when she was a child, and she played it until she was about 12. And a few years ago, she just had the idea that she'd like to pick it back up again. So our friend gave her a loan of it, and she practices on and off with it now. Yeah. So it's not mine. I'm not a musician.
You could have pretended for a second you were
an
expert.
Yeah, and then you'd be asking me to play a little tune, and that'd be the end of the podcast.
That would have been a podcast that finished very, very quickly. So if I met you in a plane, and you happen to be sitting next to me, and you have that conversation, and I asked you, what do you do? What would you say to me?
What would I say to you? So my training is in psychotherapy, counselling and psychotherapy. So I would tell you I practice psychotherapy among a range of other things that I do, such as gardening and little bits and pieces of building work and stuff like that. Yeah, so I've very broad interests, and I'm thirsty for knowledge. So I'm always trying to learn new stuff, and the psychotherapy alone wouldn't sustain me in a small place like this. And I do whatever it takes to keep me down here in West Cork, because I've had a lifelong love affair with West Cork. I just absolutely love the place. I love the people. And so it'd be a long-winded answer saying I do loads of things to get me by. Yeah. And
knowing you as little as I do, what you're saying about the psychotherapy not sustaining you, that kind of isn't true either, is it? It could easily sustain you down here, I would imagine.
It could, and I'm at a place in life where I have a thirst for knowledge in other areas. So it's untrue to say it wouldn't sustain me. I am choosing. That's a conscious choice on my part for it not to be my everything, because I just have such a thirst for knowledge. I'm interested in engines. I'm interested in electrics. I'm interested in plumbing. I'm interested in sustainable building. I'm interested in growing food. I'm interested in small scale farming, and to do psychotherapy full time would actually rule out learning little bits and pieces in all of those areas. But I just have loads of other interests,
Yeah, which I think is really interesting as well, because I'd say would you be mid-career? Like you went away and you did your profession, you're a trained counsellor and psychotherapist. That's your stock and trade. That's the thing you went to college for, you did all your qualifications in. And the typical path for all of us is, okay, that's who I am now and this is what I do. It's actually quite a normal thing to want to do other things and be interested in other things, and to let that come into your life and have other things going on and explore all of that, because you don't have to be one thing. I think in life, and in particular when we're thinking about the new year and maybe heading back into the slog and that routine, that treadmill, should we allow ourselves to be different things and do different things?
I think so. I grew up in a family where my dad was a teacher, so he was a civil servant in effect. So it was a pensionable job, a lifelong career, and I watched him work very hard all of my life, and I was very different. My nature was very different. I liked dipping my toes into loads of other areas, and to have one career path. Like my dad used to wait until retirement to say pursue one thing or another, like, I'll start going to rugby matches more when I retire. And when he did retire, he started going to France and all over Europe watching rugby matches and further afield sometimes. And in my mind, we have a finite time here on earth, and if I was waiting until I retired and reached the pinnacle of my career in offering therapy to people, I may not get to pursue those other interests. So I may not be answering your question now, Greg.
Are you allowing yourself just to do other things and not be just a counsellor and a psychotherapist? That there's more in you, there's more gears in you than just that one thing.
Exactly. And another side of that, which is for me really important. So when you're sitting with someone offering psychotherapy, I experience it as an unbelievably privileged place to sit with someone who's sharing depths of their pain and their inner world and trying to get to a better place or trying to get to a better understanding of who they are. I couldn't tell you how moved I've been by some of what people have shared with me. But to go out and then start using hand tools and go doing a little bit of building or doing a bit of gardening, it's the opposite. It's not as nurturing. It's just a completely different side of the brain to engage with. One counteracts the other. And that's probably part of the reason I engage with those other things as well.
Yeah. I suppose in a way, the psychotherapy and the counselling, it probably rams a particular part of your brain. There must be a point with that the saturation, is there?
100%. And to be with another person and sit with them and witness them for an hour, it takes quite a lot of energy, emotional energy. And I couldn't envisage myself doing it full time without completely depleting my own energy levels. So something I always have to be mindful of. Whereas out expelling the physical energy then on the other side of it, I quite enjoy the slog of putting a hard graft into a day's work, doing manual labour,
Yeah. So it's not as taxing mentally, but you can just get stuck in and get a sweat in and get a bit of exercise and all of that.
Yeah, and feel like I've moved my body for the day,
So you mentioned your dad. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Dungarvan, County Waterford, and my parents were actually blow-ins to Dungarvan. My dad is originally from Limerick, and my own mother is your mother's sister, so you know yourself that she's from Cork City.
The quirky one in the family.
That's it, yeah, so you say.
Your alternative mother.
My alternative mother. That's funny to hear that. That's how my cousins perceive my mother, because I never realised that she was alternative as much as she is, and I still wouldn't, compared to some of the people in my immediate locality around here, she wouldn't seem that.
In the family context,
in the family context.
She was the one that was the alternative one.
For sure, yeah.
Because she had that curiosity, didn't she? She'd be on herbs and alternative treatments for things and all that kind of business, wouldn't she? She was a bit like that.
She would, so I experienced really bad eczema on my skin from a very young age as a child, and I remember she brought me into a doctor when I was probably 4 or 5, and I was awful cuts on my skin, really, really painful. I can still remember the pain from them in really awkward places on my body, and the doctor it was a 3-minute conversation, prescription for steroid cream, and we didn't have internet back then either, so steroid cream, and my mother was putting it on my skin and then realizing that it was leaving scars and my skin was becoming thinner and thinner, and she started wondering what's going on here, and I don't know how or where or who introduced her to different modalities of healing, like herbal medicine and naturopathy and what's the other one called, homeopathy. She started exploring different modalities then and bringing me to different practitioners, and they really helped me, I have to say. It cleared my skin up for the most part. So I'm really grateful that she had that alternative perspective, because that mainstream model would have just kept me on that steroid cream for life, and my skin would have just been getting thinner and thinner. So yeah, I've a lot to be thankful for that she did have an open mind to it, at least. Yeah,
and I would say at this point in time the world would be a lot more open to all of those kind of alternative approaches to things, as opposed to back in the day when your mum was exploring it.
Yeah, sure. Nowadays that information is readily available. There's a whole industry after popping up in the holistic healing industry, and I suppose in some ways the therapy model is in that regard inbuilt into that industry, but the information is just so readily available, and it's easier to track the results now because there's so many studies being done, but herbal medicine is the original medicine. That's what our ancient ancestors would have used before the advent of science and pharmaceutical medicine. And that I'd really like to be clear as well. I'm not trying to shit on pharmaceutical medicine, because there's a time and a place for everything. And I've had many medical interventions. So I really respect that perspective as well, just to be really clear.
Yeah. Your practical mother needed to solve the skin problem that her son had.
Exactly.
Yeah. So dad was a teacher and your mum was pretty much stay-at-home mum, was it?
Stay-at-home mother, yeah. My dad was a teacher and he taught music after school and he did all sorts of stuff. And yeah, my mum was a stay-at-home mother until I went to secondary school. And then my dad was the principal of St. John's Special School in Dungarvan for children with special educational needs. And she went in there when I was a teenager. She just had more free time. My siblings were gone to college and all of that. And I think she primarily worked with a boy who was mute, so he couldn't speak. He could hear, but it was actually something to do with, he couldn't actually move the muscles in his mouth to speak. So she went off teaching him sign language. And again, her curiosity, she just threw herself into that and went off and learned it herself so she could communicate with him. It was actually very inspiring. And now I don't know if she still is able to use the sign language, but she learned a lot of it over the years with that boy. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair play to your mum.
Yeah.
What were the conversations around the kitchen table in your house?
God, that's a good question, Greg. I don't really recall. So my dad was big into rugby, Munster rugby in particular, more so than Ireland, as a proud Limerick man. So we would have talked a lot of rugby, and I was big into sports as a child and teenager. So we would have talked a lot about that, sports and careers, like what we wanted to pursue as careers or studying in college. So yeah, it was pretty broad-ranging conversation. My dad was a great conversationalist. He used to practice the art of active listening, and he would actually teach us that, or teach me, maybe not so much my siblings because they were that bit older. So he would teach to listen and to wait, like listen to someone to understand them as opposed to listening to just to respond, because you're only half listening then. My dad's passion was education. So I guess, it's probably fair to say that we talked a lot about education, and he used to always be firing riddles at me and different maths equations like arithmetic, and I don't know if your own kids would remember, but a lot of the great-grandchildren, say, of our granny, and same on my dad's side, they would know my dad as the one who'd throw really interesting questions at them at family gatherings or whatever. So to come back to the original question of what would be the talk at our table, a lot of the time would be to do with education or like active engagement around learning maths equations, and his knowledge on maths and the English language in particular was mind-blowing. So we would find ourselves talking about the origins of words, which myself and my older brother in particular used to absolutely rip the piss out of him because we didn't care. But he just was like, do you know where that word comes from? This is from the Greek word for whatever, or the Latin word. And we still, till his dying day, we took the piss out of him over that. It's good fun, and probably sounds like a very nerdy family, but we're not at all. I think my dad was a bit of a nerd, but the rest of us aren't.
He was a nice nerd. Noel, our lovely Uncle Noel, I was telling you earlier that I'm sure we were babysat so many times by so many people down through the years. But the ones I remembered was your dad and your mum, and your dad would bring the guitar around, and I would have been very introverted, but he was the one who would get you singing along and all of that stuff. He had that lovely way. And even as we got older, and you were mentioning, when we get together at parties and stuff, a lot of the adults would have a token conversation with you. How are you getting on now? Whatever. But your dad would always ask the question, and he'd look at you he'd want the answer from you, and that would open a discussion, and he'd have a discussion with you. He'd always treat you like an adult. So did it feel like the sessions around the kitchen table, did that feel like school part 2, or was it in a different context?
Sometimes it did.
Yeah.
And as I became a teenager, I would be a bit more boundaried with it, and I'd be telling them to feck off.
Enough already.
Yeah, exactly. I tell you, Greg, it has served me in life. Like, even I have a stepdaughter there, Rachel, and it has really served me in life. And I can only see it from the perspective of being in a parenting role myself. What I'm able to offer her when it comes to helping with homework and stuff like that, I never once thought about a lot of his little tips and tricks for doing maths quickly. Never thought about it in the meantime since I left school. But to be able to offer them now, to Rachel as she is growing up and going through school and finds herself stuck in maths equations, and I would just come, oh, my dad had a trick for that, like the way of finding the average of 5 odd numbers or something like that. Just like that, he'd have something for you, and I'm able to carry that legacy forward from him, and I'm really grateful for that, I have to say, you know.
When you're sitting in the classroom and for whatever reason the teacher has totally and utterly lost your attention, where does Mick go in his head?
Wow, that's a big question for me, because it was like, as a teenager, very young teenager, I withdrew a lot in class. And I think I was actually just bored, but I used to always find myself wondering about the meaning of life. That was where I'd go. I'd look out at the sky, even I can do that now, look out at the sky here, and it doesn't irritate me now as an adult.
And while you say that, right?
Yeah.
Describe what we're looking at.
So it's a beautiful, frosty, clear morning with a very expansive view out in front of us, and there's a beautiful blue sky with some clouds out there, but it's a gorgeous day, and the expansive view of forestry and just rural farmland for as far as the eye can see.
You're sitting at the bottom of Mount Gabriel.
Sitting at the bottom of Mount Gabriel, on the north side of Mount Gabriel, about 7.5 kilometres outside of Skull Village is where we are. I'm actually where we are. We're kind of smack bang in the middle of a triangle of 3 villages: Skull, Ballydehob and Durst. We're kind of equidistant to the 3 of them. Durst might be a minute or 2 longer. So this is where I live.
It's stunning.
It is
stunning.
It's a gorgeous little spot we have here. I really love it, and it's actually the longest I've lived anywhere. Like in this home, it's the longest I've ever lived anywhere that isn't my family home.
So the meaning of life, go on.
Yeah, so when I was, fair play to you, you were reading my mind there, because I was like, how do we get onto this? So when I would be in school, I would be pondering the meaning of life. I'd be looking out at the sky, wondering if there's a God, or wondering if there's something that created all of what surrounds me. And as a teenager, it used to absolutely torment me not to have the answer. So it actually led me into a lot of mental health difficulties as a teenager, but now as an adult, I'm able to cope with that. It's, there's an inbuilt resilience. I don't need to know the answer now. I feel like just we are here, and it's a beautiful
It was torturing
experience.
you that you couldn't figure it out, was it?
Yeah, so like...
Why don't you just ask your dad? He knew everything. For God's sake.
I should have, yeah. That probably would have been a longer conversation again.
We'd still be listening to it, I think.
Yeah. The act of listening. So yeah, I used to wonder that, and one of the things I used to wonder is if I kept on flying into that sky there, would I eventually meet an endpoint and burst out of it and just be like a piece of bacteria on someone's hand or something like that on a larger world, So that's where my mind would go, in sitting in school when I was bored.
Okay. And you mentioned mental difficulties or whatever, or stresses. Why was that, do you think?
I think it's just because I was a curious person. I just was always really curious.
But it sounds like, from what you were saying, that there was a negative that ended up delivering a negative to you as opposed to a positive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, from an adult perspective now, I absolutely turned it into a positive, that curiosity. But I think what used to frustrate me was just not having an answer, and actually the more so the feeling of uncertainty, or the real potential that I may never have an answer, and really sent me into a spiral. But then, that also tied into just being a teenager, growing up, hormones flying, interested in girls, having difficulty talking to girls and all that kind of thing, just regular teenager struggles. But then the undertone, there was always an undertone of, why are we here?
And did that ever get to the point of needing to talk to someone or anything like that? Were you introduced to, can I say, the profession you're involved with now in some way?
Not as a teenager, but as a 20-year-old is when I first sat with a therapist myself. And, my dad had asked me loads of times as a teenager. He always expressed concern about my mental health. And he invited me to go either with him or with my mother or all three of us or just on my own to go and speak to someone.
But why would he have said that? Is that because Mick is sitting in his room and not coming out, or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That, even though I used to hang out with my friends, but I wouldn't volunteer my feelings very readily to my parents, nor did they expect me to. But I think my dad, maybe more so intuitively, could just sense the kind of deep unhappiness I felt. And it was all to do with that existential stuff, wondering why we were here and what was my purpose.
You should have given me a remake.
I know.
I'd have explained it to you in 2 minutes.
If only there were mobiles back then, I would have been sorted. So yeah, just long-winded answers, like as in, I don't have the full picture just yet. But anyway, yeah, to come back to my own introduction to therapy, I did sit with a therapist when I was 20, a lovely gentleman in Care in County Tipperary, and I used to go to him and speak to him. But around that time, I started dabbling with drugs, and I had been drinking for a good few years by the time I was 20. I'd started dabbling with drugs without realising it. The after effect of the drugs in my 20s were also making me feel very down, really impacting my mental health, because what goes up must come down, and as far as high as you'll go with drugs, you're going to come just as far in the other direction when it turns 180 and the party ends or whatever it is.
Did they help when you were feeling shit? Did they solve a problem for you that wasn't being solved in any other way? Even temporarily, just for a moment or whatever?
Oh, they did.
Yeah.
They did, and I think that's why I got so heavily involved with them, took me away from the question, what am I doing here, or what is this all about? It just took me away from that. It escaped, I think that's why anyone who gets caught up in addiction, they're somehow trying to escape the pain that they're in, and whatever form that pain takes.
I suppose in a way it's probably solving a problem.
Yeah, it's self-medication.
That you weren't solving by other mechanisms.
Yeah, subduing the pain. And it did. It really worked until the Monday morning, and we climbing the walls with hangover and take you till Thursday or Friday to fully recuperate. And by that time you're ready to go again, So I was still grateful to have that therapist though in my 20s, and I was so open and frank with him that I was using drugs and stuff like that. But then the mental health difficulties progressed, and my 20s were a tough old decade for me from just my mental health perspective.
Okay, but were you studying psychotherapy at that point in time?
No.
What were you doing? What path were you on?
So my path was meandering from one thing to another. Found it really hard to sustain a full-time job because the partying got in the way, or more so the job got in the way with the partying.
Yeah.
And I just found it really hard, and I wandered from one thing to the next all through my 20s now, and I'd be here all day listing out all the different jobs I had.
I'm sure, while you were chatting about all of those different jobs, I'm sure you learned a lot along the way in all of them.
Loads.
What kind of jobs did you do?
So I worked in customer service in Amazon in Cork. I worked in a pharmaceutical factory in Dungarvan, another pharmaceutical factory in Bray in County Wicklow. I did a plumbing apprenticeship for a bit, and then I was in a car crash and I loved that particular job. Then I was in a car crash that ruled me out of that for a while, so I never pursued it again. I started an apprenticeship as an electrician. I actually studied management in college during my 20s with Lidl, the German retailer. They put me through college. Yeah, that was all through my 20s, and loads of other jobs as well. And then by the time I turned 30, something just clicked in my brain. I can't describe what it was. And I was like, okay, I've had enough of this partying and done with drugs. I'm 40 now, going on 41. So in May 2014, I just knocked the partying on the head and focused on actually establishing myself and getting myself away from partying, and turned my back on everything I knew and everyone I knew in my whole life, and decided just to take a different path completely. And I only started studying psychotherapy when I was 33. So it wasn't an early course of study that I did. And it was actually on the back of getting away from the partying. It was a huge effort to get away from that lifestyle.
Was part of that physically moving away?
Yes. So I was living in Dublin, moved back to Dungarvan. That's how I got away from it, and knew loads of amazing people. But my context for knowing them was partying, and I still would be in contact with a lot of them, amazing people. But I just knew for myself I needed to sort myself out. But it was through the effort of overcoming that particular hurdle, getting away from the drug scene and the party scene, that's what led me into the psychotherapy work.
And tell me, while you're chatting about that,
Yeah.
as parents, if there is someone in your family who is troubled, wrestling with a few demons, all that kind of thing, and you're watching this and it goes beyond the teen years and then into the 20s, and they're adults at that stage. Mm-hmm. You know, who are you to be interfering with their lives or telling them what to do or whatever? But they're still your kids, you know, and then you still feel responsibility. What does that parent do?
What does that parent do? Well, in the context of addiction, I had loads of friends that used to express concern about me for how much I used to party and how much drugs I used to consume. And because I couldn't hold down a job, it was a real juxtaposition for my friends that would express concern. Because I couldn't hold down a job, I used to actually sell drugs just to friends and stuff like that. So I was always the one who'd have them and be able to sell them to the lads. It was just literally to feed my own habit. So they'd be expressing concern on one hand, but while also knowing I'd have access to drugs on the other hand and happy to take them. But really, there's nothing anyone can do until the person who's in that struggle wants to help themselves. I feel one has to hit their rock bottom before they'll help themselves. And at that point, I think it's just to meet the person in the struggle with compassion and acceptance. And it does take a long time to re-establish trust for people on the other side of the fence, the people who are wanting to be supportive. It takes time for them to rebuild trust in you and to re-establish proper human connection as opposed to frenzied connection, drug frenzied connection, or the person who's manipulative, or to see you in a different light. It took time, you know, but I think ultimately it's just do your best to meet them with acceptance and compassion, you know, because hand on heart, I've never met someone who's caught up in addiction who isn't an incredibly soft soul, who just has real difficulty adjusting to the world that we live in. You know, I've worked with loads of people who struggle with addiction. I've yet to meet someone who's genuinely malicious or genuinely an aggressive person. Just addiction does strange things to people. It's a vicious beast, like, you know.
I think, as we were saying, it was that little thing you went to solve the problem, because nothing else was.
Yeah.
And the more you take it, the deeper you need to go to solve the problem. The effects are different. And there's loads of different addictions, as we know. So with the best will in the world, the other conversations people were having with you and the therapists and everything else, your mum and dad, or your friends even, that wasn't working. So you were trying to solve it by the only way you knew how, in a weird way. But you were lucky, though, that you, I don't know, snapped out of it, or did something happen?
Yeah, so when I turned 30 in 2014, I had basically given all of my 20s over to partying, and I just decided, all right, I'm going to get away from this and I'm going to go somewhere where I think there's not a huge drug scene. So I got away from the partying, and sorry, Greg, I'm going to go back on myself.
Yeah.
I was nearing the end of my partying days. I knew the days were numbered. I wasn't away from it fully, but I decided to go to somewhere that I knew there wasn't a huge drug scene. So I went to Thailand for a couple of months with a good friend, and we travelled around Thailand and Laos, and we didn't stop drinking there, but we were drinking but stayed away from drugs. But while I was there, I had awful pains in my chest and my heart and stuff like that. So that was the kind of catalyst, and the turning point was the extreme pains. And I felt them on and off during my 20s, and I knew it was from drug consumption. So when I was in Thailand, I said, I'm just going home and I need to be with my family. They had no idea I was caught up in addiction, by the way, none. And they knew I liked to drink a lot and party some bit, but no idea the extent I was doing it. So when I got back from Thailand, that's when I knocked it on the head. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the turning point.
So then from a career point of view, by accident in a way, you were introduced to this profession that you could help people like yourself?
Something like that. Yeah, I figured out I wanted a lifestyle that was more connected to myself. I feel like quite a spiritual person, and when I'd overcome the hardest part of it, I just really engaged in personal development, wanting to cultivate resilience and inner strength and the ability to cope with whatever life threw at me. I just wanted to learn how to cope with it without having to turn to a substance. So it was on the back of that then, that I decided I'd pursue the kind of counselling and psychotherapy studies, Yeah, it was just experience of being caught up in addiction in that way and having the desire to help others. And I think it's because I have a compassionate disposition towards people. I would resonate with the struggle that I see an addict going through, like, even on the street, someone begging. I don't give them money. I stop and talk to them as a human. That's what I do instead of giving them money to feed their habit. And each time I do that, they would tell me that they'd really appreciate that, as opposed to someone just throwing the coins at them, which they also need, but actually just to be seen and witnessed as a human.
You would obviously have the empathy for people because you understood. So, like, there's nothing like learned experience to be able to treat people. Do you enjoy that work?
The therapy work?
Yeah.
I do. I really do. As I said to you earlier, it's just an unbelievable privilege. Firstly, that people would put their trust in you to share their inner world. And, it's incredibly fulfilling, and to see people make progress is very fulfilling. And, it's the therapist's job, it's their role. It's a very unusual position because it's my job to make myself redundant in that person's life. And when that does happen, there will be a bit of sadness because you develop really nice connections with people. And, in a really kind of perverse kind of way, it actually shows me that there's always someone who's worse off than you. People come in here who have had much harsher struggles than I ever have had in my life. So there's always a good reminder in that. And it's also very humbling. It's a very humbling job when someone shares something like that would make your jaw drop on the floor, where you can't believe some experience would happen. Sorry, I'm being vague in my stuff because it's a very confidential space as well. But yeah, just an incredibly privileged role to sit with another person in that context. Yeah.
For someone who's never been to a therapist or a psychotherapist, what's the process?
So the process is, when someone reaches out on the phone, you just get a very quick sense. You don't want it to be a long conversation, and you want to make sure it's a good fit, that I as a therapist am a good fit for the person coming to me. Sometimes I won't be. I think someone with more experience than what I have might be more appropriate, so I'd send on a referral, and it's very important to be able to do that. But when someone lands into the space and actually starting therapy, you're essentially building a relationship. So you don't go too fast, because if you try to go too deep too quickly, it can actually be very overwhelming for someone. So the process is just establishing why the person is with you firstly. And I kind of come at it from a humanistic perspective, which is, it's called a person-centered approach. It's actually just meeting the person where they're at and establishing if they've got particular goals, or is it just an outlet for them to talk and be heard. So it depends on what the person is there. So sometimes you can have very brief, it's called brief kind of focused therapy, where they want to overcome a particular struggle that's holding them back and move forward. So you might just have 5 or 6 sessions. And then other people literally come and you're a sounding board. Sometimes I have sat on, well, you're actually sitting on my therapist chair. I'm on the client's chair here. But I have sat on that chair and probably uttered less than 50 words in an hour, literally sitting and listening and just gently feeding back.
You're making up for it today.
Yeah, I am. I certainly am. Which is, it's certainly unusual for me. And literally just feeding back to the clients what I'm hearing. So when someone says something out loud and I say it back to them in a very different way, when they hear someone saying it back, they can hear it in a different way. And they're like, God, did I really say that? So the process, what's the process? There's no set process with it. It's always guided by the client. It's like a client-led process. But I'm always, you have to be mindful of interventions, because if you're flogging a dead horse with something, you're flogging a dead horse. So sometimes it's called a skillful intervention. You might gently point out something, be like, so I see an aspect of your behavior here. Do you think there's a possibility that might be impacting the area of life that you're struggling in? And I feel like I'm giving a very long-winded answer to a short question, but really the long and short of it is there is no set process.
And in an Irish context, we're probably still very wary about that whole idea of having a therapist. And of course, if you go something like stateside, should they all have a therapist? It's just a part of your normal life. You have your hairdresser, or your chiropodist, and you have your therapist. Do people need a sounding board? Do you have to be in depths of despair, be carrying around a burden to benefit from a therapist?
Not at all. There's an expression in the therapeutic world. It's called the worried well. So it's like, whatever way life has become, it's busier now and stuff like that. There just seems to be more anxiety about life these days, but you absolutely don't need to be in the depths of despair to benefit from a therapist. Like, many people come from the perspective of actually just wanting to engage in personal development. So it can be come at times more of a coaching role. Like, you'd have people coming for all sorts of reasons, and some people just want to work through like a marriage difficulty or a relationship struggle, or some piece of trauma from their childhood that just keeps playing around and interfering with their moving forward. And then some people, it's literally, supposing like a married man with 4 children under 10 years of age, working 40 hours a week and coming home to a busy household. Someone like that, it's just an hour where they can speak to another adult uninterrupted and share their perspective, and maybe get my perspective if they ask for it. And just an hour for themselves. It's like an hour of self-care, and that's what gets them through their week without sitting at the bar stool or something like that,
Yeah, okay. And since COVID and everything, a lot of that stuff, I believe, has gone online. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
Again, that's a matter of perspective. Personally, as therapist role, and as someone who I do go to a therapist myself from time to time, I prefer sitting with someone in person. And then there are other people, I do the online work as well. And for some people, having that barrier between being on a computer screen, there is speculation in the therapeutic community, like the different governing bodies and stuff, that for some clients, having the computer between you is a safety net and a safety barrier. And for someone who would have difficulty sharing their inner world with another person, having that barrier might lend itself to them sharing more deeply. So like everything, it's always a matter of perspective. Now, I did find it challenging in the beginning to do the online work, but as I grew relationships with clients, it just became easier and easier. And now it wouldn't knock a feather out of me, you know.
Yeah, it's probably a convenience thing as much as anything in particular, if there's a bit of geography involved.
Exactly, yeah.
Having said that, then, like, I travelled to meet you today.
Yeah.
And that act of travelling somewhere and thinking about what our discussion was going to be. And I know once we finish and you're travelling back, there's a little bit of space between both things where you're still, it's still part of the session in a way, the going and the coming away. I can imagine if we're in the middle of a Zoom call and I just click end or stop, and within 30 seconds you're back into your mad world. It's probably good to have a little bit of space to just reflect on the conversation that you've had and to allow yourself to actually do that.
Yeah, you nail on the head there. That's such a true thing. And that's part of the beauty of coming in person. You have that 15-minute drive or whatever it is, home, reflect, and then back into your life, you know. So yeah, it is. That's the other beauty of having in person, yeah.
Yeah. Coming into a new year, I think I was saying this to you earlier, I always think when you have that little break, you know, of course you get dragged into the festivities and the late nights and all that kind of thing. But you do end up stopping your routine for a while. Now coming into a new year, it's firing up all of the engines again and getting dragged into all of that. If you want to contemplate a little bit of change in your life and protect yourself from just that treadmill, any kind of things you'd be saying to someone? In particular on things that are troubling you, you know, just not repeating all of your same habits and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, firstly, ditch the New Year's resolutions because every day is the beginning of a whole new year, you know, in a way. I always experienced in my own life New Year's resolutions as a stick to beat myself with when I would eventually let them go a week or two later. From my perspective, how I would go about a new year, because I've had the break, I've had the indulgence of Christmas, are just four things, like the four pillars of mental health. I like this: the quality of the food you're eating, relaxation, exercise, and sleep. I focus on the four of those, and if the four of those things are in a good place for what works for me, I will get through the year. Or if I can be on top of those things, say 80% or 85% of the time, I will do okay for myself in that given year. Yeah.
Give me those four again.
So food, exercise, sleep, and relaxation.
Okay.
In whatever way your body needs those things, if you can do those well, 80 to 85% of the time, you'll be doing well in life, I think. So
you were saying those basic things just build a good, strong foundation for everything else that you're doing in your life.
Yeah, and they're acts of self-love. Now, I don't want to come across as preachy because I don't do all of those things well all of the time. But if I am doing well with those, my life is, I'll always notice a significant shift in my life, and I'll be feeling better, be more productive, I'll be more tolerant of others, I'll just be doing well, doing better in general, like, yeah. Okay, talk to me about each of them. So food, if you're getting a good mix of nutrient-dense food and eating regular meals, I'm saying you, but if I'm doing those things, if I'm eating well, eating nutrient-dense food, not eating too much sugar, not drinking too much alcohol, stuff like that, I will be feeling good. I'll be feeling very energized. So that's the food. So mind what you're putting into your body, basically. Exactly. Yeah. Good fuel. Yeah, exactly. You know, everything. Like, yeah, we need fuel. Like your car outside needs proper fuel in it. Then exercise. It's a given. We need some form of movement in our lives, whatever that looks like. For you, if I was talking to a client, I would be encouraging doing something that they really enjoy as opposed to something that they hate just to feel or look better. And to go with the food as well, everything, sorry, just to go back to that momentarily, it's just moderation. Try your best for moderation. Again, something I'm not hugely skilled in, but I do my very best. So yeah, with the exercise, just doing something you really enjoy that makes you feel good.
And that's a double win, because it's good for your body, but if you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
And try to find that thing you enjoy as best as possible.
Yeah, and try to be consistent with that. That's what I have found works for me, is the consistency. If it was like 5 minutes, 6 days a week is better than an hour once a week.
Yeah,
doing yoga or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Like,
we apologise to all the anyone trying to flog gym memberships at the moment.
Yeah,
profusely.
Yeah, and God, there's people with vastly more knowledge on these topics than I have. So these are just my own perspectives. So that's the exercise. For me, sleep is really important. I struggled with sleeping for many years, but now I try to get to bed at the same time every night. I don't spend a huge amount of time in the bedroom outside of sleeping. So it's like my designated space for sleeping and very little else.
But I presume if you're eating well and you're getting that bit of exercise, the sleep part probably comes a lot easier as well.
Yeah, it's all cyclical. One ties into the other. And then the last of those things is relaxation. I love just nothing more now than sitting on this couch and looking out at that beautiful view and relaxing and doing nothing. I don't pick up the phone. I light the fire and look out, or spend some time outside. Like, I live in a beautiful place, doing nothing other than relaxing and actually being okay with that. We've kind of become human doings as opposed to human beings. We just don't always allow ourselves to be. And again, that's a symptom of society and how busy lives have become. They're my self-care rituals.
And in a way, a lot of things in life, it's a case of, okay, I'll do that thing. The things that you don't like doing are the things that are good for you. In a way, everything you've mentioned there, they're all quite pleasurable.
Yeah.
Good food, you feel the better of it. You always know what it feels like after, once you've eaten a load of crap.
Yeah.
As you're saying, exercise, in particular, something that you can enjoy. You get the bit of relaxation as well, and you get out of your head and stuff. You always feel better after a decent night's sleep. Relaxation. It's really a case of organising your life. And I think of my treadmill, kicking back into it again, it's probably introducing maybe a bit of discipline to make sure that I am doing all of those things properly, because you're nourishing yourself instead of that terrible feeling when you get to the end of a year where you're absolutely burnt out and worn out. The minute you stop, you end up getting sick, guaranteed. That's when the heavy flu that most of us have had over the last few weeks kicks you in the backside. And you're like, crap, here we are now, trying to relax, and you're doing nothing but sneezing and coughing for the whole day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you about resilience. And that's me now as, I'm not going to start calling myself an old timer yet, but I'm not a young buck anymore. And it does concern me a little bit. And I always kind of wince when I hear the conversations. When I think we're talking mental health a bit disproportionately. Now, you might say, Craig, sorry now for your trouble, sunshine. We need to talk about that more and not less. I fear a little bit that it's a little bit of a go-to. If even in work we're saying, okay, let's do a team exercise, and straight away, oh yes, let's do something that's good for your mental health. And I think a little bit, Jesus Christ almighty, are we over-talking this to the extent that there's a danger that when you come under a little bit of pressure, because in our case, a client has got a big event coming on, or there's a stressful time of the month where you're trying to do the books or something like that. Is there a danger that we wave a red flag to, this is a danger to my mental health? Is there a danger that we do that too often, and that we just stop accepting from time to time? There is a point where you're going to experience a bit of stress because that's normal. Mm-hmm. And instead of waving a big red danger flag the whole time, we just need to be better at navigating those times better.
Yeah, it's a big very big question, and I don't have a concrete answer for
I
it.
forgot to.
Yeah, I know.
Come on,
I know.
this is your job now to solve this big dilemma immediately.
Yeah. If I was any good at all now, I'd have a proper answer. Yeah, it's a tricky one because I feel life has become so busy for so many people. And, there's the cost of living kind of stuff, which is a huge burden and stress on people in the modern
modern
world. Yeah, it would be okay to offer like an answer from, say, a psychotherapeutic perspective, and then maybe my own personal answer. So, have you ever heard of fight or flight?
Yeah.
It's a trauma response. My perception from speaking to people is that many people at the moment are stuck in fight or flight all of the time. And when you're in that place all of the time, there's a certain part of the brain activated that's only supposed to be activated at times of immediate danger. So you can either fight the danger or run from it. And like I'm talking now, primitive brain kind of stuff, like, hunter-gatherer, comes from hunter-gatherer kind of stuff. But when people are in that space in their minds so much of the time, it lends itself to being stressed, and it's a very tricky thing to work with, but it falls upon each person to learn how to deal with stress. There's so many tools out there now, and I come at it from a place of compassion, like where I would go if a client sat with me saying they were that stressed, or if I'm that stressed myself, I'm like, okay, what am I choosing in my life that is causing me stress? Am I eating well enough? Am I exercising well enough? Am I, like those 4 pillars I touched off, am I getting enough sleep or relaxation? And am I actively participating in my own self-care? Because to counteract stress, there's so many ways and means of counteracting these things now that I feel it's really, really important for people to do that, but to actually recognize. And again, it kind of comes back to what you're asking earlier about a parent witnessing someone caught up in addiction. Someone might have to feel that rock bottom before they can, but that's usually burnout in the modern day before they can make a change. But I think it's important to recognize the burnout or that you're going towards it, or that you're really stressed, recognizing it and doing something about it before you hit a place where you're no longer functional as a person. I'm not sure if I'm answering your original question. But those things would, like active self-care, sitting down for meditation, going for a swim, embracing discomfort, like jumping into the cold ocean is becoming very popular. Those kind of things, I think, build resilience. Placing yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. And for the person who, maybe that normal bit of stress that we're talking about, that comes with your job, or some of your life things, or your home challenges. You've got 2 or 3 kids and they're freaking out and all that kind of thing. Or you've got a teenager or an adult child who are under a bit of stress or whatever. For that person, trying to distinguish between that red flag mental health part where I'm nearly in flight to maybe, okay, this is normal. It's really normal that you're feeling like that. You don't have a severe mental health issue, but you've got a lot of real life stress that's happening around you. And and you need to maybe understand that they're a normal part of life and just cope a little bit better. I suppose in a way my concern is that that there's a difference between it being a mental health issue and it's normal life stress. Yeah. And what you need more than anything is maybe better coping mechanisms. Yeah. You should find them within yourself and you should bring them into your own life if you can learn those coping mechanisms. But maybe that's what we need to be telling people better than anything.
I suppose a thought that struck me is just that it has become so all-encompassing, this conversation around well-being, and I think there's just so much information out there and differing viewpoints, but it almost seems like it's become so enormous that it's actually pushed us away from well-being than it is bringing us closer to it.
I think in a way that's what I'm really worried about.
Yeah, that the focus on it is actually is having the opposite effect. Like we spoke of the social media making us less sociable, but all the talk around the awareness of mental health is making us less resilient. Is what I'm gathering you're kind of touching on.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, all of that, Mick. So, what's happiness to you?
What is happiness to me? It's a good question, and it's one I contemplate. And happiness for me is an emotion among a range of emotions, but really for me to feel happy on an ongoing basis is actually just accepting where I am in any given moment, being able to just accept that I'm feeling uncomfortable, or to accept that I'm feeling really good. And so happiness for me, is actually just being content and accepting where I'm at in a given moment without fighting it. Now, that doesn't always happen, but
of course it doesn't.
True happiness for me is contentment.
Yeah. Okay. If I put winning alongside that, that feeling when you put the ball in the back of the net, that moment of elation or whatever. For you, when it comes to goals and achieving stuff, what does winning look like for you? And even going forward in your head, what does it look like?
Winning for me looks like going forward, just being able to function well in my community, to be involved and immersed in my community down here in West Cork, and to feel like I'm living a life of purpose.
Yeah.
That purpose for me is being in service to others or helping other people, the ability to be helped within myself, but to winning at life for me is being able to say that you love most of what you do.
Okay. Now, just on what you said, it sounds to me like you've just figured out that question that was wrecking your head as a young fella in school.
There you go.
What was the
nail on the head? Yeah. That's it. To live a life of purpose. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Jeez, it took a while for you to get there.
It did. Yeah. I had been contemplating it for quite a while. So yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. You've brought me to that point.
So in life and the Win Happy podcast, what I like to think about is that we make choices along the way to find more happiness in our lives, to bring us closer to the things that we think will bring us happiness and pleasure and all that kind of thing. What was the best choice you've ever made, the best life choice?
The best life choice I've ever made was to take a leap of faith and move to West Cork. I always knew I wanted to live here, but myself and Ellie, we weren't long together. Ellie had a daughter. I had never lived with a child.
Well, hey,
and I just threw...
That is huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
And I just threw caution to the wind, and the way we even got our hands on this house to rent. I just threw caution to the wind and said, let's do it, because for years I was trying to wait for the right time to move to West Cork. It was always my dream to live here, but the right time isn't you don't wait for the right time. You just it doesn't actually appear. You have to take the opportunities when they appear, and that's what I did. So hands down, the best decision I ever made was to move down here, and I'm so glad it has worked out, because it has turned out to be beyond my wildest dreams, and it has offered me more to live down here than I ever thought it would. So yeah, that's my best life decision.
Yeah. So Mick, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and well done for being one of those few people who, when we say, we must get together, for actually making it happen.
Yeah, well, thank you, Greg. I have to say, just thanks for having me on the podcast, firstly, but thanks for welcoming us so warmly into your home the other day. And another good decision I made in life was to follow through on us meeting. It was a real privilege, and these are the longest conversations we've ever had as cousins, and I've thoroughly enjoyed them. So thank you.
Yeah, maybe we should all just you know, when those doors get opened, we should just say yes and walk through them, you know.
Yeah.
Thanks a million. Good night yourself.
Thank you, Greg.
dude.
Really appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.